Welcome back, Real World Retirement, the podcast. I am Alexander Pushman, your host, and thanks for joining us. I hope you've been enjoying this journey with us. A little bit about who we are and what we're doing here. We are a bunch of financial experts who take true passion in educating our community. Me personally, I've done over 3,000 second opinions of people's retirement plan, and I've been in the business well over a decade. And we have over 20 advisors here at Foguth Financial Group. And one of the things we pride ourselves on is educating people to make good and honest financial decisions. It's such an important part of your life where you work your whole life and you get to this place and you kind of get to the Mount Everest, right? And you don't want to mess it up. Hey, I made it. Let's not mess it up. So that's the main thing that we focus on is we want to educate you. So if you're somebody out there who has questions or you need something, or something we say in the podcast, that's me. I need more on that. Please engage with us, right? Make sure you're following us. Make sure you're subscribing. We got a good one today. So I'd like to join my man Leyland Lindie to the set here. He's one of our phenomenal advisors. And the topic today is going to be first principles of investing. Now, Leland, I know you're like the whiz kid when it comes to some of this stuff. Talk to me a little bit about first your story, and then I kind of want to get into the actual topic, first principles of investing. Tell the folks a little bit about why you do what you do.
Well, let me just say thank you, AP.
Absolutely.
It's awesome to be here. I appreciate you. I appreciate you having me on. First principles of investing. So my story, I guess we got to go back to the beginning.
Right.
So I grew up in Midland, Michigan.
Right.
Okay. So if you know anything about Midland, Dow chemical country, right? Everybody in the town works at Dow one way, shape, or form, community of scientists. So I've had a, strong scientific thought process ingrained from early on. Now, I grew up thinking I was going to be, a scientist of some sort, right? When I was young, my mom got laid off from Dow Chemical, actually.
Okay.
And she decided, I'm going to go back to medical school, right? Job security was important. I'm already a scientist. I've already been an analytical chemist. It's not that big of a jump.
Right.
So she went back to medical school, right?
Okay.
Became a physician. And, going through middle school, high school, I thought I was going to do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like a family business, right?
Right.
When I got to college sophomore year, my uncle passed away suddenly from a heart attack. And, it was, ground shaking, right? It was one of those course correcting moments where, he had been an entrepreneur. We started a family business, family restaurants. He had parlayed that into a substantial real estate portfolio.
Wow.
And, we built it as a family.
Yeah.
And when he passed away, things changed. Now, just to kind of elaborate a bit on that, his wife of 8 months.
Oh, baby.
Sold everything. Sold all 5 restaurants, sold all the real estate, moved back to Texas. And so it was financially devastating for the family, right? You can imagine. And so what happened was we all knew what he wanted to do. Hey, I bought a house for my mom. This restaurant is for my cousin, right? Everybody kind of knew what the intentions, were.
Yeah.
But it wasn't on paper.
Oh, baby.
It wasn't on paper, right? There was no actual estate plan in place.
Right.
So not only was it emotionally devastating, it was financially crippling. And so that made me really kind of get disenfranchised with medicine, and it kind of put me on this path to figure out, well, why did that happen?
Yeah.
And then how do we stop it from happening to other people? So that's like my origin story, you know what I mean? Ingrained from a young age, you got to do something to help people.
Yeah.
Right? And I realize in this industry, we've got the opportunity not just to help people on a one-on-one, but we can change the whole, trajectory of people's families if we do our job well.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah.
Wow. I know me and you have chatted about it, but I've never heard the whole story about the uncle side of it. And that's, hey, if that's not what we would say, Mike Tyson punch in the face, right? Wake you up. Exactly. And that was, to your point, is like a trust legacy issue.
Exactly.
Right. Hey, we talked about everybody knew, but it wasn't on paper. And then this 8-month wife goes and throws a grenade.
I like to joke that, that I got hit with Hurricane Katrina twice.
Right.
Right. You know what I mean? Hurricane hit Memphis, where my family was from, but also,
that piece.
There's that piece as well.
Yeah.
So that's what got me into the industry.
Okay. All right. Well, it makes sense, and it makes sense because I know you're super passionate about what you do, and you have an amazing, like me and you, I think have this in common. We love our clients. You know, we genuinely like, you know, I go golf with clients, we hang out with clients, and you know, you're giving them hugs, right? Like you have a huge heart, and I appreciate that. And so I love that. So now, first principles of investing.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what are these first principles. I know you kind of highlighted it. There's basically 6 sections on how you educate your clients.
Yeah.
Can you do me a favor and just kind of highlight those 6 sections? And then what we'll start doing is we'll start diving into each one if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So from my perspective, from what I've learned and you know throughout the industry, there's 6 main pieces of a truly comprehensive retirement plan.
Right.
You need a foundation.
Right.
You know, and that could be savings plan. That could be just having the right protections. I mean, you got a young family, you need life insurance. You're a property owner, you need LLCs. You know, protecting different parts of your portfolio.
Right.
You need an investment plan.
Right.
Okay. We need an income plan, which I think is one of the probably most overlooked, underplanned aspects.
Totally agree.
We need a tax plan.
Yep.
We need a healthcare plan. And we also need an estate plan.
There it is. Right.
So the first principles part is, you know, in engineering, there's this first principles kind of mindset or framework to think about how to solve problems.
Okay, so that first principles comes more from the engineering world.
Yes,
Got
exactly.
it.
Exactly. And they basically say, okay, if we're trying to solve a problem, instead of solving it by reference, we've always done it this way, so let's start there and figure it out. First principle says, let's get to the base of what's actually objectively true. And then let's build from there. Let's work our way up. So in financial planning, you know, maybe this is just a bit of, you know, who I am personally, maybe a bit of a contrarian.
Right.
You know, one of those kids who's always asking, well, why? You know?
Right.
But I from the financial planning, let's look at each part of those, each 6 of those, and figure out, well, is there a better way than what's just kind of always been done the standard? So that's the first principles mindset to investing.
And I love that. And now let's jump in from the bottom up, the foundation, as you put it, because basically what we got is we got a foundation. We got, and you know, and to your point, that could be savings, that could be protection. There's some layers to unfold there. Then we get into investments. Then we get into income planning, right? Then we get into tax planning. Then we get into health care, which is, hey, that is not discussed a lot for the record. Most people leave that one out. And then we get into that legacy piece, estate piece, right? So this is we got the full deck. And I know that you got some nuggets on each one. So let's start from the foundation. What are the things that you think are the most important factors of a foundation of a good plan?
Okay, number one thing I would say is you got to pay yourself first.
Yep.
And you got to set it up to be automatic. Right? Sometimes the biggest risk to your financial retirement plan is you. Right? So we got to account for that. How do we plan around that? You need to have your savings and investing automatic. Okay. Right? So a lot of us, you know, 401k, okay, it's just coming out before I never even see the money.
Yeah.
Right? Well, in addition to that, right, I always say, you know, save as much as you can stand.
Right.
Right? 10% should be a minimum. A lot of people are like, well, hey, I don't know if I can't save 10%. If you go through your budget line item, you're gonna find a lot of leakages.
Right.
I'm spending, you know, $10 a day at Starbucks.
Right.
Right. If I put that in the S&P long term, I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands, you know, ridiculous amounts of money. So,
oh my God,
people don't realize that there's a lot of habitual things they do.
Yeah.
That when let's break it down, identify them, let's actually put that to work long term for yourself, for your family.
Right.
And you're going to get a better result.
Okay.
So, you know, I talked about the protection, life insurance is big, young family. If something happens to you, you need to make sure, hey, you know, they're going to be taken care of, you know. And so that's the foundation, those kind of foundational layers. I'd say that's the most important thing.
I love that. And to your point, like, because one of the things you said right out of the gate there is pay yourself first.
100%.
And don't we see that all the time with small business owners? They just keep investing in their business and they keep investing in their business and they keep investing in the business. And they never take that time to start scraping some off the side and put it in investments, get it off to the side. That's probably the biggest mistake I see with small business owners.
100%.
So that's a phenomenal point. Okay, so foundations, number one, making sure you have the appropriate protections in place, whether it be life insurance, whatever that may be. You got a business that's in the appropriate designation of an LLC or whatever that needs to be. And then also automating your savings.
100%.
Okay, now then we go to the investment layer. What are some of the things that you look at there?
So in the investment piece, and I'll just say, when I first got into this, I realized, I thought, this is where, you know, the rubber hits the road.
Right.
You know, one of the things, there's a lot of maybe academic knowledge that's thrown around, but when you actually study the best in the world at investing, you realize that they actually take a different approach a lot of times.
Right.
And so trying to bring some of those techniques, some of that learning down to the retail level where our clients can benefit.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you realize that one of the things that, you know, the top investors do, you know, there's a famous Warren Buffett quote, right? 2 rules of investing. Rule number 1, don't lose money. Rule number 2, see rule 1, right?
Right.
So I try to bring that's important, right? Maybe on the way up,
Yeah.
you know, hey, I've got a 30-year time horizon, market's gonna do what it's gonna do. But when you're talking retirement planning, losing money is critical, right? I've worked with people who, you know, planned on retiring in 2007, 2008.
Work
right?
a couple more years.
I did a seminar. This gentleman stopped me in the middle of it and said, what you just said described me exactly. Retired in 07, 2008 happened. My portfolio wasn't defensive enough. And I ended up having to go back to work as a truck driver for another 12 years. Didn't retire until 2020 when the pandemic hit.
Wow.
So from the investment planning piece, when we're talking about retirees and retirement planning, you need to have protected growth.
Yeah.
You need to have assets outside of the market, outside of, you know, risk of sequence of returns risk and these type of things.
Right.
I also like to layer in buffered growth.
Okay.
Right? We need to have assets that are participating in the market but aren't fully just riding the volatility waves.
Right.
Then we need to have a sleeve of pure growth so that when we have these big 25% up years, okay, I'm getting a piece of that too.
Right.
And so that is kind of the foundation, the crux of how I approach the investment planning piece. I love using principal protected investments, not just downside risk protected, but also principal protection in the sense of, well, how do we protect the principal? We need cash flow, but maybe there's a way that we can position our investments to get that without drawing down the principal.
Right, absolutely. And when you're going, and like one of the things I would say out there to the audience and the listeners is what Leland is talking about is some pretty high level stuff. And you know, if I just said to you, hey, protected growth, buffered, you know, being able to take income but not sell anything, right? I know what that means.
Yeah.
And me and you are on the same page. And here's the thing I would say to the folks out there. If you are somebody who's either very close to retirement or you've just retired and you're like, wait a minute, I'm sitting in the same stuff I've been sitting in for the last 30 years. I'm going to encourage you to take some action here. I want you to reach out. I want you to drop us a line, send us a comment on social media, send an email in. We can get you teed up with Leland directly, and he can help educate you on exactly what he's talking about. Because what we're really talking about is diversification. 100%. And we're talking about the different seasons of somebody's life 100%. To where if you're from 40 to 60 in your prime earning years, your investments are going to look different, hopefully, than when you're 60 to 80. 100%. Right. And that concept. And then again, my personal story with my grandfather's the same wavelength, you know, took too much risk at the wrong times. And had to move in with my folks, you know what I mean? Because he ran out of money. So that lands really, really, you know, on my heart. But what I would also add to that is the last thing you had mentioned about not having to sell off investments and get income. You're really talking about dividend strategies there. Is that accurate?
100%.
Okay. Can you give a little bit of education on dividends and how you use them for retirees?
100%. So, you know, maybe this is just kind of my baseline defensive posture that I take with investments, but I, you know, I'm a true believer in cash flow. Right. Not just, we haven't even got to income planning yet, but in your investment plan, you need to have assets, you need to have investments that are providing cash. Right. It makes it easier to rebalance. It makes it easier to, you know, if I need money for XYZ, well, we have cash set aside for that. Right. There are investments out there that will allow you to say, hey, give me a 8, 9, 10, maybe 11% yield paid monthly, where at the end of that term, not only have I gotten these dividend payments, but I'm getting my principal back. Right. So a lot of people don't even know that there's all kind of tools out there that are available that you can't find in your 401k, you know, in the election options, that your standard IRA may not have, So some of these are, you know, I would say had maybe historically been used more by institutional investors, you know, endowment funds, things like that. But, you know, when you take a first principles mindset and you realize, well, hold on, I can use some of these techniques too as a retiree, and it's going to give me a better outcome, or at least a better chance at a better outcome, it's like, well, let's explore that and kind of dig deeper into it.
And and I know your approach to it, and my approach is, hey, we're going to educate you on all these options.
Exactly.
And then based on your unique situation and comfort level, we're going to start making decisions on which ones make the most sense for you. Personally, for my client base, I love dividends. And they work so well, especially for more moderate to conservative families.
Mm-hmm.
There's some phenomenal options to reduce risk, still get great yields, have that income stream. So I couldn't agree with you more. And again, if you're somebody out there, you're like, dividends, I've heard about them. What does this mean? Engage with us. I'll tee you up with the master right here, okay? So investing, you're basically saying, hey, what we do traditionally when we're working, it should look different in retirement. Totally
100%.
agree. We should also have different levels of risk, right? We should have safe products. We should have some buffers, and we should have some just pure growth, right?
Exactly.
And again, based on somebody's comfort. But that traditional view of always doing the same thing, 60-40 bond stock, doesn't necessarily work, to your point, because it's a different layer of your life.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And just because something worked once upon a time doesn't mean it's going to continue to work into the future.
Right.
Stocks and bonds are supposed to be uncorrelated.
Right.
And they can be, but they become highly correlated when it matters most.
Yeah.
Right?
And look at 2022.
Average
bond was down 13% that year. Again, it depends on what you're holding, but that wasn't a quote unquote safe investment that year. Right?
Exactly. So, and to your point you made earlier, we deal with this every day.
Yeah.
We're professionals.
Right.
We discuss things all the time, and I'm not saying you get jaded. You think that everybody knows this stuff, but it's kind of like,
hard,
you go to a cardiology office and they're talking about EKG signals. Like, I have no idea. And they're like, well, everyone knows this.
Right,
you know what I
that's a
mean?
good point.
So we gotta be mindful of trying to meet people where they're at. And
I love that.
So,
and again, if that's you out there, education, reach out. We can make this. We can bring it down to any terms you need us to bring it down to. So, okay, so all right. So we got the foundation.
Yep.
And then we got the investing, and then we go to income. What are some tips, nuggets you'd throw at the income side?
So the income planning is the most important part, right? We spend our whole lives working, get a paycheck, you get to retirement, and the purpose of those assets is to provide income.
Amen.
Right? You can't pay bills with Apple shares, right? So we got to turn these, this portfolio into cash flow.
Right.
Traditionally, the approach is, well, I'm just going to have a, 4% or 3% drawdown. That's my sustainable withdrawal rate, and that's my income plan. I mean, what's wrong with that? And from my perspective, and I'm sure, the audience, you guys have seen these reports. Well, if I do 3% or 4%, I've got a 92% chance of success, right? We've run a Monte Carlo, exactly.
Yeah, Monte Carlos,
Personally, I have some qualms with that, just because with something so important as your retirement, 92% chance isn't good enough.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You're not going to leave the safety of your kids to a 92% chance. You're not going to, not have fire insurance on your house because there's only an 8% chance my house is going to burn down. Right? So when I approach the income planning piece, we need to get this as close to 99%, right? Obviously, we can't say it's 100% guaranteed.
Right.
But we need to have an income plan that says, 99% chance of success.
Yeah.
And so that sort of 3 to 4% sustainable withdrawal rate is more of a guideline to me.
Yeah.
Right. A true income plan is going to say, okay, this is where we're going to pull cash from in an up market. This is where cash flow is going to come from in a down market. These are the accounts that we're going to liquidate, right? If it's qualified, non-qualified Roth.
Yep.
Right. These are the specific investments that are in our portfolio to generate income. And if, XYZ happens to that, then we have a backdoor, we have a backup plan to get cash from. So the income planning piece, in my opinion, it's analogous to climbing Everest.
Yeah.
In a certain sense, you reference, right? It's like on the way up the mountain, I'm sure you guys have heard these kind of analogies. Retirement planning is, you get to retirement and you've hit the peak.
Yeah.
I ask people, well, what's the most dangerous part of climbing Everest? And they say, well, the cold, gravity falling off the mountain. It's like, well, when you look at it, there's this, they call it the death zone.
Yeah, right.
Right? There's on the way up, the last, few, what is it, a couple thousand feet on the way
Right,
up, last few
right.
on the way down. And retirement planning is the same way.
Yeah.
You're the 3-4 years before you retire, and then the 3-4 years after you retire are where you're at your biggest risk.
Totally agree with
And
that.
so we need to have both an investment plan that is going to protect you. Hey, I'm 3 years out. I need my investments need to be reflective of that.
Yeah.
But you also need an income plan that says, okay, this is what I'm going to do year 1, 2, and 3, so I don't overspend,
Exactly.
and so that I'm not crippling myself. So
Yeah.
that's the kind of the approach that we take to income planning.
And I love that. And just, one other thing I would add to that is like, it's that concept of proactive planning is always going to help you. Right.
Exactly.
And looking into the future, because, to your point, Monte Carlo simulations are great. I love Monte Carlo simulations. Yeah. What I like better is looking at every single year individually and breaking down what's our risk in this year. We can look out over somebody's next 35 years. Is this how much we're spending? And this is what our net worth is, where are we pulling money? And again, you usually don't do it for 3-4 years, but you can look at that. So that's a great point. Okay, so we got foundation, we got investing, so we got income, and then we got taxes.
Taxes, right? Well, two certain things in life.
Right.
You know what I mean? And,
Yeah.
and I know we've covered it, on the podcast and whatnot. Let's take a first principles approach to this.
Okay.
The story that a lot of people were told is that you need to put all of your money in a 401k, IRA, pre-tax, right? Qualified account.
Right.
Because, your high income years are going to be while you're working.
Right.
Let's not pay the taxes. Then let's wait till we get to retirement. Our taxes will be lower, our income will be lower, and we'll be able to save money on taxes.
Right.
I don't know if I've met with a single client where that turned out to be true.
I agree.
Where they were like, yeah, we want to make less. We actually, the life.
We're we were eating at the nice Italian restaurant. We're going to go to Burger King now. Not happening.
That defeats the whole point of retirement, right? The whole point is to work to the point where your assets can now take over, going to work for you.
Right.
So, doing tax planning around that, right? Again, the standard sort of methodology, standard operating procedure is actually kind of putting a lot of people in a disadvantaged position.
Right.
Now, this gets compounded when your income plan is already set.
Okay.
Right. So a lot of our clients, hey, I've got 2 Social Securities coming in and a pension that covers all of our cash flow needs forever.
Bang.
And so now they're looking at an issue where, well, hold on, what are these RMDs? What are those? Right. A lot, I do a seminar and I ask people, okay, who doesn't know what RMD? Who doesn't know what RMD stands for? And a few people raise their hand, and it's like, well, that's because you're too young.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
RMDs mean required minimum distributions. IRS, hey, we gave you this special tax account. You didn't pay any taxes on it. We let the funds grow tax-free. Well, eventually, the IRS, they come knock and say, hey, we need our portion of that.
The chickens are coming home to roost.
A lot of people don't realize that 401ks, IRAs are actually joint accounts.
Yeah.
Not with their spouse, but they're joint accounts with Uncle Sam.
That's actually good. I've never heard that. That's pretty good.
So we got to plan around that. So now,
absolutely,
with the tax planning, if we do nothing, we're going to be in a position where, hold on, the IRS is forcing me to take out a bunch of money that I don't need.
Yep.
And now I'm paying more for, more taxes on all my other income.
Right.
I'm paying
Medicare,
more
Medicare goes up. Your tax bracket jumps up, right? And you lose complete control of it because you didn't see it coming.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so we got to plan for that, right? And raw conversions aren't necessarily for everybody.
Right. Absolutely.
I've got a client who has, a lot of non-qualified money. And so part of her tax plan is, hey, I'm just never going to sell some of these positions.
Right. Or put them into certain funds where we don't get like phantom gains. Or we're paying short-term gains, right? I mean, there's a couple ways to skin that cat. Okay.
Exactly.
And to your point, the tax conversation is complicated.
It is.
And it's very unique to the family, right? Because to your point, it's either we're talking about qualified accounts, IRAs, right? 401ks, et cetera, or we're talking about non-qualified accounts, which then really just gets into the importance of somebody being educated on the different investment choices.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, okay. So, all right. So we got foundation. We got the old, we start getting in there and keep ricking down the layers now.
Okay.
We hit taxes.
Yep.
Next, healthcare.
Healthcare.
What would be a couple bullets you throw there?
Healthcare is a big one. So, I'll just kind of bring up my personal experience with healthcare.
Right.
My grandmother retired with great Social Security, great pension, $500,000, in the bank.
Yep.
I remember getting, a call from my dad basically saying that, and let me set the table. My dad's side of the family is from Northwest Iowa.
Okay.
So, Granville, Iowa, we're talking a town of 400 people.
Right.
You know what I mean? Where hey,
right.
we can probably
Small
get around.
town.
Field of Dreams, like cornfields everywhere. I mean, Granville they had a big celebration when they got their first stoplight.
Oh, baby.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure they ever turned it on. Right? It might have just been blinking yellow, but hey, we got one. So we're talking as small as it gets.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad getting the call. Hey, Grandma was driving around Granville for 2 hours. Right. So obviously, it's time to make adjustments. And so, she went to, first, assisted living.
Yeah.
And then, eventually, progressed and went to full nursing. And so the full nursing care facility she was at was a great facility. It was relatively close by. It was $8,500 a month.
Okay.
So you're talking, $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
Right. So, $100,000 a year, 5 years, $500,000 disappears like that.
Bang. And she wasn't planning on it.
She wasn't planning on it.
Yeah, that wasn't in the plan.
It wasn't in the plan. So what ended up happening, thankfully, she was in a Medicaid approved facility.
Okay.
So, Medicaid for long-term care. For you don't know, Medicare does not cover long-term care.
Right.
Medicaid does, but you have to be destitute, right? So $500,000 evaporated. The house that, my dad and everyone grew up in had to be sold off.
Yeah.
Right. So now I didn't know at the time how to, I wasn't in the industry yet, so I didn't know the things I know now. Mm-hmm. But if I did, and if as a family we did, we could have avoided that.
Right.
So, with the healthcare plan, yes, we need to figure out, let's plan around our Medicare Part B premiums. Are we going to take Part C, Advantage? Or are we just going to use A, B, and D, and then, Medigap supplement plans, or, but the long-term care piece, we also need to address that.
Yeah.
Right. 70% of people are going to need it. Probably 20% or less have it. Probably even 10%. Right? So one of the just key takeaways with long-term care is that there are a lot of different ways to solve that. One of the ones is using Medicaid state partnership programs.
Yeah.
Where you can protect X amount of assets, maybe $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. But still be able to qualify for Medicaid.
Right. And that's one of those ones where you got to have a professional in your court to 100%. Know how to navigate those waters.
100%.
Because that's where it gets really complicated.
We get
3-year look backs, blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But to your point. So, and again, I think to your point though, Leland, when you look at that healthcare and that long-term care space, one of the things I always talk about with clients is the best thing when you have an advisor who's been around a long time and been in the trenches and been in the weeds with families, experience matters.
100%.
And you learn, I learn new things every week. Yeah. And I've been doing this for well over a decade. And I learn new stuff every week. I'm like, wow, I didn't realize, because it's always changing. It's granular details.
Exactly.
So to your point, long-term care, healthcare, that's where you got to have an expert though. Yeah. Is that fair?
100%. 100%. It's very tricky to solve on your own. If you Google it, it's oh my gosh, long-term care, the premiums are crazy expensive.
Right.
Well, again, working with an expert, you realize, well, hold on a second. You actually can use HSA dollars to fund long-term care premiums. The IRS saying, hey, we will give you the ultimate triple tax benefit account to try and keep you off Medicaid.
Wow.
Right? We'll let you fund your own long-term care, which is essentially an insurance against
with an HSA.
With HSA dollars.
A lot of people
so
don't know
you never
that.
got taxed.
A lot of people don't know that.
And now you've got a long-term care policy to help take care and essentially to protect, your beneficiaries' assets that you're intending to leave to them, not to go to a long-term care facility. So.
And that really gets me thinking. If you're somebody out there who's got an HSA and you're like, hey, I don't know how to use these dollars, right? Because there's limitations to it. You can't use it for everything, right? But it's a great tax advantage program where you're not paying taxes on those dollars. You're not paying taxes when it grows. And to Leland's point, you can fund that into a long-term care policy. And if this is the type of stuff where you're like, well, wait, I never heard of this. Wait, what are they talking about? do me a favor. Do me a favor from a personal standpoint. If you got somebody you trust, great. If you don't know somebody in your network who can help educate you, that's what we're here for. That's what
100%.
Leland is an absolute expert on this subject. Reach out to us, engage with us, because here's the reality. We can help you understand what you can do with those dollars you have. And again, if you're somebody out there with an HSA, I met a guy the other day, had $60,000 in an HSA. He's like, I don't know what to do with this. We started talking about these different options, but you got to learn to understand it. Okay. So we get through the 5, we're on the 6th layer, and the one that brought you into the business,
the estate planning.
one that got you, estate planning.
Yes.
Throw a couple nuggets out there.
So, with the estate planning, obviously depends on where you live, right? We're fortunate in Michigan where, there's low cost options to ensure that your assets are going where you want them to go.
Right.
If you're in a more complex situation where there's real estate in different places and things like that, right? And, in general, okay, you got will, you got trust, right? My default actually is to tend towards trust.
Yeah.
The reason being is because, it's one of those pay now, pay later type of things.
Yeah.
Right. With the trust, okay, it's going to cost you some money to get set up. But once it's set up, there's a lot of different options of, hey, you pay a fee and then, the trust can be written and updated for the rest of your lifetime, right? So, but with the trust, you get control, right? So in my family's case, had those assets been, estate planned using a trust,
everybody would have had what they were supposed to have.
Everybody would have had what they were supposed to have.
And unfortunately, your uncle rolling in his grave, I'm sure, when that happened.
I can imagine that he was not pleased with the outcome.
Yeah.
But, everything happens for a reason,
Amen.
right? Maybe that's why I'm here and I could potentially use that to help, hundreds or thousands of other families.
Absolutely.
To kind of.
It's a great way to look at it.
So,
the silver lining, right?
Yeah, exactly. Everything happens for a reason. I'm, as a scientist, right? I'm a cause and effect guy, right? Everything's just because you can't see the full cause and effect doesn't mean that there wasn't a reason. So, but yeah, so the estate planning.
So you lean into the trust, though.
I usually lean into the trust.
Okay.
Again, full control. I've got a client that's older son is a lot more responsible. Hey, you can take the money and handle a couple $1 million. It's not going to be an issue. And maybe the younger son's not quite there yet. Right. And so with the trust, we can say, well, hey, you've got to do X, Y, Z. Graduate, get married, keep a job for 5 years.
You can put it in there, absolutely.
Right?
To your point, you can add it in there.
You're going to get X% every 10 years, right?
Right.
With the trust, we can, okay, hey, I know that my grandkids are going to be taken care of. So that's the reason why, that extra control that you get. Plus, too, if you look at it, having an estate that's, ends up being unsettled, goes to probate, it's going to cost you, can cost
time, money, energy.
A lot, right? And so, hey, I paid, I just paid on the front end to get the trust set up, but I get the peace of mind of knowing, hey, doesn't matter what happens, something happens, tomorrow, or if I live to 100, everything's covered. So that,
And I think, one thing I'm thinking of is like an overlying factor I'm hearing is at each piece or layer we're talking about when it really comes to a true comprehensive plan is having somebody in your corner who will educate you on each section, right? It's really difficult if you're a person out there who's listening. You're thinking to yourself when Leland's going through this, wait a minute, hold on. I need to talk to my bank about savings. I need to talk to a financial advisor about investing. I need to probably talk to a different financial advisor for income. I then need to talk to my CPA about taxes. Then I need to find an insurance agent for healthcare. And then I need to find an attorney for estate planning. And this is the best news about it. If you have a good financial advisor like Leland, right? Like candidly, all the advisors that work here with 100%. Foguth Financial Group, we can handle all those. Listen, I'm not going to be the one who's going to write the trust for you, but after I've sat down with hundreds and hundreds of families and seen thousands of situations, unfortunately, money brings the worst out in people. And, hey, do you want the money to stay in your bloodline? There's ways we can do that through a trust.
Exactly.
I'm not the one who's actually scratching it. I didn't pass the bar, but we got a guy who does, and so if you can get an expert who can actually educate you on each one of those subjects, and then you bring the expert in when it's in. I think one of the biggest perks to having a good financial advisor, just from my experience in the business, and obviously we are biased, right? Yeah. We have a biased opinion. But one of the biggest perks to being in a spot where you have a good financial advisor is we have a network. We have a network that we can clue you into so you don't have to go out there and cross your fingers you're not getting bamboozled. 100%. You know what I mean? And I think to your point, education at each layer is important, and it happens at different points in your life, but it's really important to do it kind of to your point in that window. Hey, I'm 3-4 years out, right? But it's never too late.
It's never too late. You can always look forward. You can always be better. That's kind of the first principle. There's always a better way, and that's, it's a moving target, right? There's regulation changes, the market changes, there's innovation in the vehicles and tools, right? So you need to have a kind of growth mindset.
Yeah.
I'll say this, to your point about having a good fiduciary advisor on your team, someone to help guide you through the jungle. There's studies that show that we add about 3% per year.
Right.
And I've actually even seen studies that show that having a good fiduciary advisor actually has a measurable increase on health outcomes.
Wow.
Right?
Less stress.
Less stress.
Wow,
We talked about long-term care, healthcare planning, et cetera.
Yeah.
And so, I joke around. I end up working in healthcare anyway, it turns out, somewhat indirectly. But again, you can't, the peace of mind that you get of knowing that I've got my foundation, I've got my investments, my income, my taxes, my healthcare, my estate plan, everything's buttoned up. Doesn't matter if, I live to 100 or something happens to me tomorrow.
Yeah.
The market can go up, down, sideways. Rates can go to wherever. I'm covered.
Yeah.
Right. When you get that now, and we've talked about cycles and seasons, you go from being in this kind of position where you're uncertain and reactive to a position where actually I know I'm covered. I've studied history, and I can now not just be reactive to these patterns, but I can now use them to my advantage. Quick story, I was working a few years ago. I was working at the bank, basically kind of in an associate advisor role, right? And, I had this client come in, and this was 2020, probably mid-April. Comes in on a Saturday. He says, Leland, I want you to send $1 million wire transfer over to my brokerage account. And I was like, what do you mean? And he basically was like, hey, it's time to buy the market. We're down 30. Now, we had been trying to get this gentleman to work with us, and our resume's like, no, I got a guy. I'm not worried about it. Thanks, though. We're doing your business banking, And so I was blown away by that, because what it told me was that he was working with somebody who had him so prepared, right? Everyone else is freaking out. COVID, it's the end of the world. And he was just sitting by, being patient, waiting for the right time. Yeah. Now, again, people will go, okay, that's time in the market. You shouldn't do that.
Right.
And I'm not saying that's what we do, but I'm saying with the right preparation, when you have all your plans in place, you're not worried about, what CNBC is saying about market volatility.
The talking heads.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
that's a great story to kind of wrap things up. And how I look at this. This is some good information, Leland. I appreciate you coming on today.
Happy to.
And the kind of the key takeaways I took from it is kind of at each section. So you get into a situation here where you have a foundation, and that foundation starts with making sure you have the appropriate protection for your family, but also you're paying yourself, and you have an automated monthly
100%.
Savings going into investments, whether that's Roth, non-qualified 401k.
Exactly.
Then we get into like what we would call income planning, right? And we start making sure that we actually have a plan to account for our budget long term, proactively looking at your life and making those type of decisions, right? The investing, right? The investing piece of like, hey, that 60-40 blend, does it work for you? Maybe. But educating yourself enough to understand what are all of my investment choices and which ones make sense for me. Because what it looks like at 30 should look a lot different at 60.
100%.
Fair. And having that diversification, and also educating yourself on, hey, those protected growth products, those buffered products. Hey, what are the really good growth products? And understanding the division of lines within that investments. Then we get to the taxes, and really talking about, hey, can I save any money on non-qualified money? Can I save any money on my IRA dollars? This is a big one because nobody likes talking about taxes. Healthcare, long-term care. I think you unfolded that one phenomenally. Just make sure you understand, again, your options and you're educated, and you got somebody in your court who's a fiduciary.
100%.
And then the estate planning, let's make sure we check all these boxes so you can have peace and purpose with your money and you can live with a good peace of mind and not stress out, which actually will give you some more lifespan, hypothetically.
You know what I'm saying? So we're, healthcare indirect, right? So, I mean, it's important. So, AP, you're 100%. I mean, you nailed it there. I know you're in this business to change lives,
right?
And
Absolutely.
And do good work, and we can see it. We appreciate it. Your clients see it,
right?
And I'm trying to do the same thing, right? How do I help as many people as possible? If I do that well, I can get to the end of my career and know that, I've had a tangible, measurable impact, and I
love that.
That's the goal. So
well, thanks, Leland, and you're one of those guys who I always appreciate talking to you. I always love hearing your point of view, man. You got a phenomenal mind, and I love that engineering, right? First principles of investing. 100%. It's a great take on it, and so again, if you're out there and you're learning some good stuff, Leland just was giving us some real nuggets there and really broke it down in a phenomenal way. So if this is something that you need some education or something popped out there that you felt, is kind of pulling at your heartstrings, please reach out to us. This is why we do this. We love educating people. It's not one of those things where it's going to cost you anything. We love connecting with the community and talking to people. This podcast has been a lot of fun for us. So if that's you out there, please engage with us, follow, subscribe, do all that. If you liked what you heard today, please continue to join us on this journey if you're enjoying this. But thank you for joining us on the Real World of Retirement podcast. I'm Alex Pushman. Thank you for joining us. Thank you again, Leland, for coming today
to be here.
And spending so much time and putting some great energy into this. And we will see you in the next one. Thank you for joining. God bless you.
Advisory services provided by Foguth Wealth Management LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. For additional information, visit advisorinfo.sec.gov and search 327434.